Hello, this is a paper by Jeni Driscoll, Anna Fox, Will Hardman and Rob Playfair, looking at how we set up and developed teachers forums for EAP Teacher Development on the in-sessional team at Liverpool. Unfortunately, Anna can't be with us today for the recording, but she's been central to this project. So we'll start by examining why we set up the teachers forums, the format of these teacher development sessions, our own individual evaluations of these sessions, and consider some ongoing questions. So there were a number of reasons why we created these forums. Primarily, it sprung from a frustration with meetings that didn't seem to have teaching on the agenda. A key factor here also is the in-sessional context that the teachers were working in and can be quite isolated from their EAP colleagues in this context. So you can pause the recording and read about why we wanted to create the teachers forums. And the format was quite simple. Tutors would prepare and present an example of something that worked well, something that didn't work so well, and each tutor presented individually, followed by Q&A or group discussion, about 10 minutes per teacher. There was a facilitator who set up the running order and shared these sessions, but essentially it's teachers talking about teaching. So Will, Rob and I evaluated our experience of the teachers forums independently, and this is mine. You can pause and look at some of my reflections. And I'd just like to focus on one in particular, the idea of teachers forums creating a judgment-free space where you can make mistakes, talk about them, and learn from those mistakes. And this is in contrast to some of the more formal teacher development contexts, such as formal observations, which can be quite sort of top-down, resource intensive, reward heavy, people feeling judged about whether they are good enough. In contrast to that, the teachers forums really provided a space where you could take a trustful, knowing that you would be supported by your colleagues and that you would be given constructive, helpful suggestions for some of the problems that you were encountering in your teaching. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Jenny. So these are some of the reflections I had about how the teachers forums have affected my practice, and I'm just going to focus in on motivation. So I joined the in-sessional team in 2020, and teachers forums were already set up by that point. Will and Jenny were already on the team, I was a relatively new member, and I was immediately teaching across 5 disciplines, 3 faculties across the university, some of which I had no experience of, plus figuring out how to teach online like everybody else. So it felt like a kind of immense amount of learning I had to do, which could have been overwhelming, potentially demotivating. So having teachers forums on the horizon each term, knowing that I was going to have the opportunity to share a problem, ask a question about some of my materials with my colleagues who I was kind of getting to know at that time, gave me a focus for my own sort of professional development. And these are the kind of questions that I found myself asking. So what problems do I want to bring to the forum this time? It might have been collaboration with subject tutors, how to link lessons into a coherent syllabus, issues with students attending or not attending, and issues around that. And then thinking about how to express it in a productive way, because in the staff room and in other sort of contexts within my job, I maybe have a tendency, like many of us, to whine or to moan about our situation, which is fine. Obviously, we've got to let off steam, but teachers forums didn't really seem like a place for that. It was more about trying to be productive. So I tried to think about phrasing those problems in a productive way. So either by sharing an example that illustrates that particular problem that I've got, maybe through an extract of my materials that I'm working on, or maybe some solutions that I've tried that haven't worked and want to kind of workshop that with my colleagues. And then the last question was whether it's going to be relevant interesting, or also impressive, you know, because there's an element of kind of establishing myself within the team. Now, of course, teachers' forums weren't the only place that I could discuss these things, but the kind of semi-formal nature of the teachers' forums, with the scheduled time slots, and, you know, a captive audience of colleagues who had to kind of give me feedback, really motivated me to give a bit more thought to kind of articulating my contributions to the teachers' forum, which maybe I wouldn't have done otherwise. And I was actually able to draw on lots of my contributions to the teachers' forum for my TEAP fellowship application as well, so it had a very kind of practical benefit as well. Okay, over to you, Will.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, so these are some examples of my reflections, and the one that I really want to focus on is the impact that it had on my knowledge of and approach to EAP. I remember when I first joined the forums, or when they were first set up, I was completely new to in-session or discipline-specific English, and I remember kind of having quite serious doubts really about what it was that I was doing and what it was that I was offering to students. I remember a lot of the kind of lessons that I've been teaching had been very much focused on a process-based approach to writing, or if not, maybe they incorporated some kind of general EAP, or even kind of some ELT kind of approaches, teaching like standardized English as well. And I just felt that this wasn't really totally what the students were wanting, or they were wondering, you know, what it was they were getting from these sessions, and what I was really offering them. And so, yeah, over time, I think the forums definitely helped give me a broader idea of what EAP could be. So I remember, and again, it wasn't something that happened initially. Actually, at the beginning, it was very kind of practically based, and people were just showing examples of what they did. But as time went on, I remember people started kind of grounding what they were doing in different theories and approaches to EAP in the literature. And so I remember being introduced more explicitly to kind of a genre-based approach. People were talking about incorporating systemic functional linguistics or legitimation code theory into their practice, and, you know, giving practical examples, but also kind of grounding it in the literature as well. And this was combined as well with other kind of CPD we were doing. We were also doing a journal club at the same time, and I think these things combined, and it allowed me to see myself a lot more as an expert with knowledge, and, you know, something concrete and useful that I could offer to students in this discipline-specific context. Yeah, so moving on to the next slide. So these, just based on what Rob, Jenny, and I have just been talking about, these were an example of some of the themes that we generated from our reflections. We actually noticed lots of overlap, so we thought it would be useful to kind of break these down into a set of themes there. Okay, so on to the next slide. So kind of in keeping with what I've just been saying about this kind of move, this gradual move towards theory that happened during the progress of the forum. Also during this process of creating the presentation and the further reflection that we've been doing on the forum, we actually have thought, well, are there any theories that can help us to kind of to understand what we're doing and explain and kind of guide us in what we're doing in the forum. And so, you know, one tentative idea for a theory was Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed. And again, I'm not necessarily suggesting that, you know, we as ISE teachers are probably the most oppressed group, but then at the same time, you know, when you start to look at it and analyze what was going on, I think there is actually, certainly some justification for this. So as Jeni mentioned and Rob mentioned, lots of the things that we were talking about was related to problems that we were facing, and it certainly did lead to kind of a critical awareness of our context and our reality, and we were having lots of discussions about power and agency, and so I think it certainly did become a problem-posing forum. And like I said, initially it was grounded in practice, but I think as the forums progressed, they became much more powerful, and I think they became more powerful the more we incorporated theory into what we were doing and what we were discussing. And again, Fred talks about the importance of not merely just being focused on practice, but sort of making that connection to theory as well, and how important it is to kind of go back and forth between practice, like our concrete realities, and our theories. So it's also, obviously it was a dialogic space. It was very non-prescriptive in how we set out, in how we laid it out. We were all on the same level. We very much I think that was a very important part of the ethos. And so we were acting as co-investigators. Even though some of us had different roles in the centre, we were all in that particular space. We were certainly on the same level. And I mean, even doing this presentation now, or some of the other work or reflection that we've done after the forum, we realised that this is a kind of ongoing and incomplete process. Every time we discuss the forum, we kind of move on to something new, or we have new realizations. And so again, that's something that Fred talks about, the importance of kind of being aware that your education is not something that can be completed. As I mentioned earlier, we generate a set of themes, and those themes themselves should then become the object of reflection. And I think, as Jeni's going to talk about later on, that is something that we did start explicitly doing. We started talking about what themes are coming up, and we've been exploring those themes further with, or we plan to do that as well, with kind of more ethnography about the forum. And finally, I think we can definitely argue that the forum is a form of practice. So Fred defines it as reflection and action upon the world in order to transform it. And I think certainly what Rob's examples is a great example of how he was reflecting on his concrete reality, and then that was then leading into kind of practical action in the things that he was doing in his practice. In terms of transforming the world, again, maybe that's something we can think about more in the forum. Maybe, I'm not sure if we're kind of quite at that stage, but perhaps using this as a kind of underpinning to help guide what we're doing, could be quite powerful as the forum progresses. Okay, so now I'm going to hand over to, is it to Jeni?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Will. So going back to why we set up the forums initially, we asked ourselves, did we achieve what we set out to? And if we look at this slide, we can see that we did achieve what we set out to overall, and possibly more. We definitely put teaching at the forefront of the agenda and created opportunities for meaningful development. And Will talked about the connection between EAP practice and theory, and the overlap with things that we discussed in Journal Club, and fostering a sort of a sense of agency and autonomy in terms of establishing and developing the teachers' forums themselves. We can argue that we've achieved what we set out to and more, because we didn't really think in 2018 that teachers forums would still be happening, let alone a regular feature and something we'd be interested in researching further. So although there's not a tick next to everything, that's fine. But we are hoping to take this further with a collaborative autoethnographic research project together and look at these teachers forums in more detail. Try and find out, why they've kept going. Thinking about the evolution of the format as well, they've evolved it internally to accommodate different formats, and currently this is the sort of format that seems to be working, that teachers prepare and present something that worked well or didn't, or something that they'd like to try in class, or a point, an issue, a problem that you're thinking about, reflecting on, or a way of incorporating theory into teaching. What's also interesting is that we started originally with 10 minutes, and in some cases, we've gone up to 30 minutes per teacher, spread over 3 different sessions because we can't all fit into one. And from, I think, the second session onwards, the facilitator took some rough notes and provided a sort of written summary of the key points. And I suppose what we could say is now we've got teachers talking even more about teaching. So over to you, Rob.
Thanks. So to try to kind of open up the teachers forums for discussion at this event at Sheffield, and also kind of give you guys an insight into where we are in our evolving thoughts about the teachers forum, we've come up with these questions which we think might kind of act as a guide to thinking about the ethos of the teachers forums. So their purpose, their use, and also the potential for their abuse or misuse. So firstly, this first question kind of connects to what Will was talking about. The teachers forums highlighted differences in beliefs, differences in practices, and kind of made us question what is EAP, and we certainly saw kind of a real diversity of approaches to EAP. But this question kind of remains about how much should teachers forums be a kind of have a kind of normative purpose to them in terms of creating this idea of a shared approach. Is that something that they can do, they should do? We're not, the kind of jury's a bit out on that one at the moment. And the second question is about the relation to teachers forums and other forms of CPD, like observations, appraisals, input sessions, journal club, scholarship. Will mentioned again how it connected with the EAP, our EAP journal club, and it would be interesting to kind of explore about what role do the teachers forums play in this kind of CPD system. Third point kind of gets into more dark, possibly cynical territory, but I think it's a fear that lots of us have in HE about initiatives being misused or co-opted or even misconstrued. At Liverpool, it was really a bottom-up initiative, but I think it's something that you need to kind of be cautious about being co-opted for a different purpose than it's designed for. And then the final question is thinking about, this context that we've shared today is only really related to in-sessional teachers. We were developing our own materials and we were working in isolation across departments in the university. And that all of those things, I think, kind of combine to create the impact that we've shared today. So one of the questions we'd like to pose is how it would work in other contexts. So pre-sessional context, perhaps cross-institutional, and even professional associations. So organizations like Barleap and the SIGs, there's kind of hints of these kind of things happening. And how does it work? Does it have the same sort of impact in those contexts? So to sum up, we hope that this presentation has kind of conveyed the positive impact that the teachers forums had on our practice. we think that this presentation and the article that Jenny mentioned, the research project we're doing, are kind of evidence in themselves of the impact that teachers forums can have on practitioners. We'd really love to explore this with you guys, anyone who's interested. So please get in touch via email or Twitter. I think we've got a slide of that. Oh, here are our references, and here's our contact details as well, if you'd like to get in touch. Thanks for listening.